He was a man that, on 10 days' notice, cut 30 pounds and fought Damian Maia on UFC on Fox. He is a man that came in and fought Mark Munoz, a wrestler, held him down and controlled him and then knocked him out with an elbow. He is a man that confidently looked into the camera, looked you dead in the eye and told you he would beat Anderson Silva, and not beat him by decision, he would finish him. He was a man that looked Anderson Silva dead in the eye and told Anderson Silva, I'm not scared of you. I'm not scared of you. He was a man that got in there with Anderson Silva when Anderson was dancing around and doing his little routine, and stayed level-headed and beat him. He's a man that then had him in the rematch, and I know a lot of people want to overlook what happened in that, but beat him and gave Anderson problems. He's a man that went in there with a very complicated Lyoto Machida and gave him great difficulties and cut him off very, very well and did a better job than John Jones did and many other fighters had done against Lyoto Machida. Of course, I am talking about Chris Weidman, and this is a video explaining why I like, why I respect, and why I am a fan of Chris Weidman and why I enjoy watching him fight. Really, at this point, I need some wacky entrance music, I just want to get loose when the bass drops down, 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 down. I wish I knew how to do that, but I don't. So that was my intro. So, Chris Weidman is a fighter that I'd heard about coming up around 2010. I used to start hearing about him. I knew he was fighting around 2010, 2011 on the circuit. I remember hearing Bellator were going to sign him. I'd heard a lot of things about him from people who follow the up-and-coming circuit of MMA fighters. This was at the time when there was a strike force and there was a Bellator. Well, Bellator's still around. There was a Bellator strike force, WEC, all of that. And I was hearing a lot about Chris Weidman coming up in New York, how he was a very, very good wrestler, how he had some decent jiu-jitsu as well, how he'd won some jiu-jitsu tournaments. This was a guy that fought Uriah Hall and beat him with stand-up. I was hearing a lot about Chris Weidman back then, and I'll never forget Matt Serra did a video blog, and this is when Matt Serra was at the height of his popularity, and he said, you see this guy over here? Bad New York impression. Mark my words, he's going to be a UFC champion for sure. And it was Chris Weidman. Then we fast forward to 2011, and he beat a guy that I like, Tom Lawler, who's very entertaining to me to watch. And he then he beat him with a Darce choke, didn't he? He beat him with a Darce choke. And then we fast forward to January 2012, and a lot of things happened. And when you look at the way these events played out, the guy that in the long term benefited the most from it was actually Chris Weidman. And what I'm talking about is that you had a lot of hoopla about who was going to fight Anderson Silva next, right? You had discussion that it was going to be Chael Sonnen, as Chael had come back from suspension, talked up a storm, beat Brian Stann, was now scheduled to fight Mark Munoz in the number one contenders fight. You had Michael Bisping ready to fight Damian Maia. You had those two big middleweight fights, and they were arguably the next two contenders for the belt. Then what happened was Mark Munoz got hurt. So then we got the fight that we never thought we would see in Chael Sonnen and Michael Bisping, which was quite a big fight. And then lots of things got reshuffled. Damian Maia was without an opponent until they gave him Chris Weidman. And I had heard that Weidman was at least 30 pounds over and had to start cutting weight in 10 days, which is very, very difficult to do. I know a lot about weight cutting, and I've seen what it's like in person. It's not fun. It's not fun. Especially if you don't know how to do it properly. You could really do yourself some damage, but it's just not fun anyways. But you're hearing that Weidman is having to cut 30 pounds, especially after Christmas when you've had all that food. He's got to cut all this weight, and he's got to kind of train for a fight against a very good and skilled jiu-jitsu practitioner, Damian Maia. And Weidman comes in on 10 days notice. He's kind of unnoticed, and I remember the press conference very, very well. You would never have noticed Chris. He was very quiet in that. He was just kind of sitting there very quietly whilst Chael was going off, while Rashad and Phil Davis were going off, whilst Bisping was sounding off. Then you have the fight card, and he goes in there, having made the weight, fighting Damian Maia, and managed to go the distance and win the fight and survive. And I was very impressed by that, because That's a very, very hard thing to do on 10 days notice with 30 pounds gone off your frame. And you could see that it was a problem, but I was quite impressed with the story of him hanging in there and surviving and winning the fight and beating a guy that was ranked higher than he is, and a guy that fought for the title not that long ago at the time. I was very, very impressed by that. Then you go to the fact that after the show, again, all the press was on Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva, and people were saying, you know, as Chael fights Anderson, who is there left for Anderson Silva to fight other than Michael Bisping? There's no one else. Weidman kind of, again, is under the radar, and then he fights Mark Munoz, and I believe this was like at least 2 weeks after the Chael Sonnen fight, or a week after the Chael Sonnen and Anderson fight, where Anderson viciously took him out with a knee. And you have Chris Weidman going in there against Mark Munoz, who was the other guy. Everyone was saying, oh, well, this is a formality. Mark Munoz is going to beat Weidman, and Munoz is going to fight Anderson Silva, and Munoz is going to be the guy that beats Anderson Silva. And Weidman and Munoz fight, and Weidman, it was on a Wednesday, I think. It was like during a weekday, I remember it. And Weidman actually gave Munoz a lot of problems. Munoz was struggling with him, and he kept him down. Then you go into the second round, I believe it was the second round, and Munoz goes swinging for him, and Weidman just turns and hits him with this elbow, splits him open, and then just finishes him on the ground. Very, very impressive highlight reel finish, and that kind of got everyone's attention. And then what I liked is that he got on the microphone and he said, you know, a lot of fighters annoy me when they get the mic and they go, oh, I'll fight anyone they want. He said, no, I want to fight Anderson Silva. I want to fight Anderson Silva. He wasn't stuttering, he wasn't nervous. I want to fight Anderson Silva. He does this thing with Chael on Fox, and it's on there if you can find it. And he says, look, I can beat him. I can beat Anderson Silva. And he started talking this up. Not in a way where Chael was like, you know, comical about it. But Chris genuinely was telling you and believed, I will beat Anderson Silva. You lot don't believe it, but I will. Then he did a Q&A, which was very smart. And he pretty much campaigned from that point onwards. Let me fight Anderson Silva. I can beat him. And you hear all this talk from Anderson Silva's camp. Oh, who is this Chris Weidman fellow? Who's that manager? I can do his voice. It's like, who is this Chris Weidman? He's not good for big fight for Anderson. I mean, come on. He's not the right name for Anderson. Make him a bit more, you know. Go on Ariel Helwani's channel and you'll know who this is. Type in Ariel Helwani and Chris Weidman and it will come up in one of the interviews. It just sounds just like him. But, you know, they didn't want to do the fight. Then you hear that Chris Weidman's going to fight Tim Boetsch. And I think that was a good idea. I felt that Weidman was just building up his campaign now for the title. And he needs a big fight. And a big fight to me is not putting him in there with Yushin Okami, as Karen Bryant suggested. I mean, come on. I remember when she said that. And she said that about Jacare. Oh, he needs a big name. Yushin Okami's a big name. No, he's not. No, he's not. No, he is not. Put him in there with Michael Bisping. That's a big name. That's a big name and that's a lot of publicity and that will get a lot of attention. Why don't you do that fight? But I remember saying they should do Weidman and Bisping or Weidman and somebody else that has a name that can kind of hype him up a bit more. So he's got a bit more momentum and it's a bigger fight. Weidman is signed to fight Tim Boetsch. He unfortunately suffers a real string of bad luck at this time. He injures his shoulder very, very badly. Then the hurricanes in New York and the floods in New York, I can't remember which one was which, but there's a video and his house was literally wrecked to pieces. Really wrecked to pieces. I mean, his house was all over. He doesn't have that home anymore, pretty much, from what I understand. You know, and it was really, really sad to see. You know, this young up-and-coming New Yorker, this fighter, and his house is, you know, everything he's worked for just crushed in his house because of these floods. And, you know, he's got this shoulder injury as well on top of it. And he's kind of in a limbo now. It's like, what does he do? And then you hear, basically, around March, that Weidman is going to be signed to fight Anderson Silva after all of that. Because Anderson does need a fight. And bear in mind, we just saw Anderson destroy Stefan Bonner. And I don't really think Bonner's like a top fighter or anything, but how he just destroyed him was just like crazy anyways. And he's beaten Chael Sonnen in the way he did. Anderson's aura is higher than ever, and you've got this young kid, this, you know, working class young kid coming up still in a lot of ways against the super athlete, super MMA fighter, god of MMA in Anderson Silva. This guy's lost his home, this guy's got a shoulder injury, he hasn't fought in about a year. Everything is going against Chris Weidman. But don't tell Chris Weidman that, because Chris didn't believe any of that. And that was one of the things that really won me over about him. Because I've seen many fighters, I've seen many people in real life put in situations of adversity, like real adversity, and they crumble and they let it get to them and they break and they don't go to where they need to get to. And it's unfortunate when that happens. But you see a guy like Chris Weidman just smile through every one of those things and carry on and train and tell people, I'm going to beat Anderson Silva. Believe me, I will beat him. I'm going to finish him. And he's saying that, and some people are like, oh, come on, Chris, you're not going to finish Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva's going to take you apart with his stand-up. And then I thought about the fight, and I thought about the style of fight that was difficult for Anderson. And I said, you know what? Chris is that kind of fighter. Because he can wrestle just as well as Chow. He hits significantly harder, and he's got decent enough jiu-jitsu where he could defend submissions and even attempt submissions. So he could be really, really difficult for Anderson. I don't know what to think. I think Anderson's going to have a harder time than you think. People are like, no, Anderson's going to wipe him out. Anderson's going to wipe him out. The fight happens, and Anderson does play mind games with people. Even though people don't want to admit it, Anderson does play mind games with people. And it's a part of the fight business, so I wouldn't chastise anyone if they did. He was clearly playing mind games with Chris that day. You know, if you watch the countdown, Chris even talks about the first fight, how it happened. But what I liked about Chris was the way he handled it. He handled it like a man. He didn't get rattled. He didn't get all frazzled by it. He wasn't like, oh God, I'm fighting against Silva, having anxiety attacks. He didn't get caught up in any of that. And I have seen a lot of fighters put in that situation and get like that. I've seen guys fight Wanderlei Silva when Wanderlei Silva was the best fighter in Pride. And people crumbled when they fought him before the fight even happened because it's Anderson Silva. Wanderlei Silva. I've seen people fight Fedor Emelianenko and lose before the fight even happened because they got caught up in that aura. Oh my God, I'm fighting Fedor. Oh my God, I'm fighting Fedor. I've seen lots of fighters do that with other people. And I'd seen many people do that when they fought Anderson Silva. Yushin Okami throws against him. Rich Franklin throws against him. Chris Lieben didn't perform well against him. Damian Maia. I seen Tyler Slater's was a blatant one. So many fighters just freeze against him. Whereas Weidman just didn't get caught up in any of that. Anderson even went right in his face and did that famous kiss at the weigh-in at him. And when I saw the weigh-ins, that confirmed to me that Chris was going to beat him. Because when I watch the weigh-ins, I get a very good read on what might happen. And when Anderson went into his face and did that, and Chris just kind of laughed it off and carried it, he didn't even go all wound up like Vitor Belfort did with the mask. I knew right there and then, 100%, no doubt in my mind, Weidman would beat him. Weidman and Anderson Silva fight. It's a very interesting first round. Weidman takes him down as we expect. Anderson eventually gets back up. Then Anderson starts doing his little clown Michael Jackson routine. And Weidman isn't getting caught up in it as much as you would think. A lot of fighters get caught up in it and then they leave themselves open and then Anderson set you up and then he just knocks you out, counters you, hits you with all these things. Anderson's mocking him, going by the cage, coming back, no, let's go, stand up, it's the big fight, doing all that. After this first round, Anderson's not even sitting in the stall and he's shouting stuff at him. It's the big fight, stand up, it's a big fight for the belt. He's doing all of that, and Weidman isn't cracking. Although Ray Longo did, because he punched a fucking hole in his chest. And he stays composed, and he stays strong up here. And then he ends up knocking out Anderson Silva in one of the most shocking major events in UFC of that year in 2013. And it was just like, oh my God. And I remember I did a video, and then fucking Zuffa shut me down for some reason. I don't know why that is. I'd love to know why that is, actually. And it was one of the it was absolutely crazy. It was one of the greatest moments you've ever seen in UFC. It was one of the fights I will never forget as a fan. It was absolutely crazy. And I liked how Weidman carried himself afterwards. And then Weidman goes in there again in a rematch when everyone's going, oh, whoa, it was lucky, Chris got lucky. Chris fights Anderson Silva again, and let's be real, I think Anderson was going to have a harder time fighting Chris with or without the leg break. His leg kicks were being checked. He didn't have his way with him in the clinch. Weidman actually knocked him down pretty badly in that fight. Weidman was winning the fight again. Are people going to give Chris the credit he deserves? I think they should. Weidman then fights Lyoto Machida, and I like his stance about the anti-drugs thing, and that's another reason why I respect him, because he's, he looks great. He's a world champion. He beat Anderson Silva, and from what we know, didn't need to use PEDs. And I like his anti-PED stance, actually. I'm a fan of that as well. So then he goes in there with Lyoto Machida, and Lyoto Machida was a very dangerous fight for him. Lyoto looked like an absolute assassin at 185. He's always been a great fighter. Going down to 185, he's even quicker. He's more shredded. We saw him just completely knock out Mark Munoz like he was nothing. He beat Gegard Mousasi. He's got this very awkward style that while people have been able to beat him, it's still very hard to figure him out. He can be very difficult to beat. And when he turns up the aggression switch on you, he can really take you out. And a lot of people are wondering, what is it Chris Weidman can do? And if Weidman beats him, this further cements how good he is. Weidman goes in there and he beats him. He cuts him off. He's beating him to the punch. He's beating him with stand-up, which is very impressive. With this quite awkward style, but effective style. And he's actually beaten Lyoto Machida with stand-up for 3.5 rounds. Machida then makes a comeback. But I like the fact that even when they, again, when a fighter has things going his way and then the switch is flipped on him, and then, you see what they really are. And again, Lyoto Machida is now turning the table on him, and he's really starting to light him up. And a lot of fighters crack at that point, and they're like, oh my god, I'm being hit. Weidman stayed composed and then turned the fight back in his favour again. Again, I respect that. And that is why I am a fan of him, because if you look at all of his skills, he's a great wrestler, he's got great jiu-jitsu, he's got heavy hands, and his stand-up is coming along, he's got a good attitude. But if you ask me what his greatest weapon is and why I'm a fan of him, it's his mental game, it's his spiritual game, because he keeps those things very, very strong. And we, as we've gone through, look at all the things, having to cut weight 30 pounds on 10 days notice, he did that, and he won against Damian Maia. Being a guy that was under the radar against Mark Munoz and then destroying him. Not fighting in a year, having a shoulder injury, losing his home, being in debt, coming into the Anderson Silva fight, going in there against the god at MMA, arguably probably one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time in Anderson Silva, and going out there and knocking him out. Going in there with a guy like Lyoto Machida, a guy that's very awkward, and beating him to the punch. Going in there and just doing what he does every fight after fight, makes me a fan of him. And you can just see that mental game is so strong and so solid, and that is why I respect him. And I think we've got many, many great fights with Chris Weidman to come. Regardless if he wins more and he becomes unbeaten for the rest of his career, or he even loses one, you cannot take it away from him, and that is why I'm a fan of his, and that is why I respect him. And this is going to be an ongoing series of videos, so I'm going to do these videos every once in a while. Fighters, why I respect them, and that's my first entry. I hope it was good. I hope I did it justice. I've explained why I'm a fan of Chris Weidman. Now I want to know why you're a fan of Chris Weidman. And yes, I do think he'll beat Vitor Belfort, with or without the PEDs. I think he'd beat him. I want to know what you think. I want to know what you feel. Are you a fan of Chris Weidman? Do you respect Chris Weidman? Why do you respect him? Why do you like him? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you feel. You've had 2 videos for the price of 1, and I am out of here. Take care and peace.